Algebra 2, Chapter 4, Complex Numbers. The imaginary numbers is what we're going to be talking about today. So we have equations such as x squared plus 1 equals 0. They really don't have a real solution. So mathematicians defined the imaginary numbers to represent their solutions. The imaginary unit, or I, is defined as I equals the square root of -1. This is useful when working with square roots of negative numbers. A pure imaginary number is written in the form bi, which is b times I, where b is the real number and I is the imaginary part. So now let's simplify negative square roots. So we want to rewrite the square root of negative a as the square root of -1 times a. Now we want to break a down if it is not a perfect square root and simplify the radical, and remember that the square root of -1 will equal I, or our imaginary number. So let's look at some examples. Our first example is the square root of -9. Well, we want to get rid of that negative sign. Okay, so in order to get rid of that negative sign, we have to separate it out. So we're going to take the square root of -1 and the square root of -9. So what is the square root of 9? It is 3. So, and we remember from previous slides that the square root of -1 is our imaginary number, or I. Next, we have the square root of -196. We're going to break that down into the square root of -1 times the square root of 196. So we know that 196 is a perfect square, and the square root of 196 equals 14. So we have this square root of -1. So what are we going to do with that? Well, we're going to transform that into our imaginary number, or I. Now we have the square root of -5. Okay, so we break that down into -1 times 5. Well, we already know that the square root of -1 equals I, but 5 is not a perfect square, so we have to leave that as a square root. So we're going to bring I to the outside of that square root and then leave 5 under the square root sign. Now I want you to take a few minutes, pause this video, and do numbers 4 through 6 on your own. Here are the answers to numbers 4 through 6 on your note page. Please take a moment to check your answers. If you didn't get them right, go ahead and rework them, see where you went wrong, and pause the video while you do so. Solving equations. Well, when we want to solve equations, we take x squared plus 81 equals 0. Okay? So first, what are we going to do first to solve for x? Yeah, we're going to subtract 81 from both sides. So when we do that, we have x squared equals -81. Now, to solve for x, we need to take the square root of both of those. So we take the square root of x squared, and we take the square root of -81. We know that the square root of x squared is x, and we have to break down the square root of -81 because it's a negative. So we break it down, as discussed earlier, to the square root of -1 times the square root of 81. So what is the square root of 81? 9. Good job. So we're going to have x equals plus or minus 9 times I. And remember, we get I because we have the square root of -1. Number 8. We have 2x squared plus 9 equals 1. What do we want to do first to solve for x? We want to subtract 9 from both sides. So we get 2x squared equals -8. Now we want to divide both sides by 2, so we get x squared equals -4. Now we want to solve for x, so we take the square root of x squared and the square root of negative 4. So the square root of x squared equals x, and the square root of negative 4 equals, well, we have to break that down. We'll break it down into the square root of negative 1 times 4. Square root of 4 is 2, and the square root of negative 1, well, you can't really do that, so it transforms into I. So we have x equals plus or minus 2i. Now I would like you to pause the video and try numbers 9 through 12 on your own. The powers of I. Use the pattern to simplify. So we have I to the first power is going to equal the square root of negative 1 equals I. We have I to the second power is going to equal the square root of negative 1 squared. So we have negative 1, the square root of negative 1. When we square it, it gets rid of that square root sign, so we just are left with negative 1. Now we have I to the third power. So we break that down into simpler. So we have I squared times I. Well, we know I is going to just be I. And we have already established that I squared equals negative 1. So we have negative 1 times I, or negative I. Now we have I to the fourth power. Okay, we can break it down as follows. We can break it down I squared to the and square that, so that's what we're going to do. So I squared equals negative 1, and then we're going to square that, so negative 1 squared equals a positive 1. Now let's jump over here to I to the fifth power. How can we break that down? Well, we've already solved a bunch of the breakdowns over on this side, so it's going to be a lot simpler for us to solve these. I suggest really writing these down so you can make sure that you have these for future reference when you're working up these problems. We have I to the fifth power equals, we can break that down to I to the fourth, which is going to equal 1, and I, which is I, so 1 times I equals positive I. Now we have I to the sixth. We can break it down to I to the fourth power times I squared equals, well, I to the fourth equals 1, right here, and I squared equals negative 1. So 1 times negative 1 equals negative 1. Now we have I to the seventh. We can break that down in 4 and 3, so I to the fourth power equals 1, and I to the third power, well, we established over here that equals negative I, so we put that here, so 1 times negative I equals negative I. Now we have I to the eighth, and you can go on and on and on, but you can kind of figure out the pattern. I to the eighth, well, we're going to square that I to the fourth power. So I to the fourth equals 1, and then we're going to square that, so 1 squared equals 1. Okay. So here are some examples. We have number 13, which is I to the 15th power. So we can take I squared, which gets us negative I, times 7, so there's 14, okay? So negative 1 to the 7th power is going to get us negative 1 still, and then I, okay? So we have negative 1 times I, which equals negative I. Now we have number 14, which is I to the 62nd power, okay? So we can break that down as follows. We have I squared, which will, remember that equals negative 1. Then we take that to the 31st power, which, if we know anything about squaring things or taking stuff cubed, if there's a negative sign and we're taking it times an odd number, or our exponent is odd, then that negative sign is going to remain there. So we have negative 1 to the 31st power equals negative 1. Products of pure imaginary numbers. So first we want to take out i's. So let's look at number 15 first. We have 4i times 7i. Okay, we're going to break that down to 4 times 7 equals 28. I times I equals I squared. Are we done? No, we can break down that I squared a little more. If you remember, what is I squared? Negative 1. So we could take 28 times negative 1 equals negative 28. Now we can look at number 18. Forgive me for having number 19 over here. We have I to the times the square root of 3 and then squared that times negative 8I squared. Well, when we square a square root, we get rid of that square root sign, so we have I times 3, and then we square, don't forget to square that I as well, so we have 3 times I squared. Remember, your integers always come first before your I or your B. Now we take this, we square negative 8, so negative 8 squared equals positive 64, and then we square I, which equals I squared. Are we done here? No, we can break it down further because we have those I squares, so I squared equals negative 1. So we take 3 times negative 1 times 64 times negative 1, and that will equal a number, or we can just go ahead and combine our i's, and we have 3 times 64 equals 192, and then I squared times I to the second power, and then we would have I to the fourth. Or we break it down further, and we have, when we have I to the fourth power, we get a positive 1. 192 times 1 equals 192. Now over here we have the square root of negative 18 times the square root of negative 10. Well, to break that down, we want to get rid of that negative sign, so we're going to bring I out here. And 18 is not a perfect square, so we're going to leave that underneath the square root sign. Same with negative 10. We bring the negative 1 out as an imaginary and leave the 10 in since it's not a perfect square root. So we have I times I equals I squared times square root of 18 times the square root of 10. So we get square root of 180. We can break that down even further. We have I squared equals negative 1 times the square root of 36 times 5. Or you can break it down to even further. 36 times the square root of 36 equals 6. And then you'd have 6 times 1, which would be negative 6, times the square root of 5. Now I want you to try the rest of the problems on this page on your own. Here are the answers to those problems. Now please pause the video to take a look at those problems and complete homework number 4 from your homework packet.